come soon, and a bunch of featured readers. Great featured reader that I'm very excited about right after us. Just to open things up, man, first time in Chicago, I'm wondering what it was like. Last night, John spoke at the Hemingway Foundation in Oak Park. What was it like to visit your grandfather's birthplace for the first time?
Well, it was an experience because I've never been there. And the first thing you notice when you go into the house is this really crazy Victorian wallpaper, which reminds me, strangely enough, of the Islamic architecture in Andalusia, with all its intricate patterns and everything. And I said, what the hell were they thinking of? You know, when they put this stuff down there. You know? And I said, well, maybe this was the root of Ernest's creativity. You know, seeing these kind of color patterns when he was young.
I had said earlier, I think you've got the Hemingway nose, Ernest's nose. Last night I noticed he was standing next to a picture and it was like a silhouette. And earlier I mentioned that you said you saw a picture that kind of took you aback because it looked just like...
Hey, it was a picture of my grandfather's older sister, Marceline. And it was taken of her when she was 5, maybe 6. And I looked at it and I could see my daughter Jackie, who's 6 now, and just the exact same eyes, shape of the face, everything. And it's spooky when you see that sort of stuff.
All right, so on to the book. Strange Tribe, John's memoir, a family memoir. It's of a very, very classic theme. The shadow of the father, the shadow of one's father, and how powerful that can be, being under that. It's been around since the beginning of stories, I believe. And actually, when I just saw Don DeGrazia, I was thinking about American Skin, and Alex, in the end of Don's book, refers to the dad audience and the struggle with that. Our last president almost brought us down with him and his dad.
Very dysfunctional family there in the Bushes.
So you've got a classic story here, and I always like to say that, people say every story's been told, which is not true. Possibly every human situation or a variation of every human situation has been explored, but each story is individual, and the story that you've told in here is very complex. You've got a lot of people with multiple wives and husbands, and a lot of uncles and cousins and brothers and sisters, though primarily you're focusing on Ernest Hemingway, his son, and your father, Gregory, and your experience. So, balancing all of this, first of all, how did you know when you needed to tell this story?
Well, I remember when my dad died. This was a little after 9/11 in 2001, and probably most of you don't know how he died, or don't know that much about my father. He was a cross-dresser from when he was very young, and eventually he had a sex reassignment operation and became a woman. Sometimes he called himself Gloria, sometimes he called himself Greg. And he died in the Miami-Dade County Females Correctional Center in a cell, alone. And when I went to his funeral, I was on this Lufthansa flight from Milano to Lufthansa, and then I go down to Miami there. And they were handing out free copies of the Corriere della Sera, which is the local paper. And they had this article by one of their journalists, and she was going on about my father's death and saying what an absolute shame this was, because here was this man who in no way could be compared to the myth, the legend of Ernest Hemingway. There was no connection between them, and it was disgraceful the way in which he had died. I remember reading this article at the end of it saying, this woman doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about. I hadn't done the research for my book, I hadn't done anything, but I think at that point, subconsciously at least, I decided that I would have to investigate this, to look at this feeling that I had that there was a much stronger link between these men, and what I found out really surprised me.
And then how did the early draft start coming out?
Well, the early draft I think was pretty what I would call traditionalist. Okay, I was still, you might say, hugging the image that most people have of my grandfather, which is the great American author, the macho writer, the hunter, the lover, you know, the drinker who could drink any of you under the table, sort of stuff. You know. And I was looking at my father as what most people in my family called, you know, they spoke of him as the black sheep of the family. Although I knew that this wasn't true. I mean, I could sense this. I could sense that there was a much stronger link between them, but I didn't want to go there. And I think it was my wife who sort of pushed me in a certain direction, helping me with research, the latest Hemingway scholars who were discovering a lot about Ernest, which adds to the picture that we have of him in a very different way than most people would be ready to admit as being true.
And going back to this idea of the overshadowing your father, Gregory was his youngest son, your father Gregory, and he was the most like your father of his sons, correct?
I would say that he was. I mean, I think that in many ways he was a sort of a carbon copy of Ernest, but just sort of reduced in scale, you might say. I mean, he wasn't the great writer, but he was very intelligent, very witty, an excellent athlete. He was a better shot, you know, with a gun than my grandfather was. At the age of 12, he won a national skeet shooting contest in Cuba against adults. And this was phenomenal. This just, for my grandfather, this was something which went beyond just being, you know, proud of his son. It meant that he had passed something on to his son. You know, this talent for shooting. But I mean, shooting was just an excuse in a sense. It further proved this strong link that existed between the two of them.
And there was a moment with your own father sitting in a boat, was it, that he had threw up a can?
Oh no, this is when we were out in Idaho and we were dove hunting, and I was about 10 years old. Okay, not too much younger than he was when he won that contest. And I had a 410 shotgun, and he said, "Look, I'm going to throw this can up in the air, John. You try to hit it. You know, like, let's see if you can hit it." Okay, and I hit that thing so straight on that when they found it, they had the slug of the shell inside the can. To me, this meant nothing, okay? But to my father, it meant that I hit it so square on that I had his talent. But it wasn't just him passing it to me. It means that he had transmitted something from his father. Years later, I understood what this meant to him. He was like holding it, the can in his hand, and shaking almost, okay? Because this meant that there was that connection. The important thing for him was to be connected to his father. In spite of everything that had happened to him and would happen to him in his life, this was the fundamental importance in his life, the core.
And the story's been, obviously you've been in this story since you were born, but it's been drawing you for a long time. You had asked your father, Gregory, different things about his father, your grandpa. When you got into your teen years, you started reading Ernest Hemingway and realizing, I have this incredibly talented grandfather and famous man. But your dad didn't want to talk about it.
He would do everything he could to divert any kind of questions that I had or conversation that might ensue to other topics, because I didn't quite understand it then, but I think what he was trying to do was, one, it was difficult for him to talk about his father. Two, he didn't want to burden me with what he'd had to live through. He just didn't want me to have to deal with that. And so I rarely ever heard him talk about Ernest until later on in his life, close to his death.